let's move on to another meme, which
Please.
is the ranged meta meme. Does ranged meta actually exist?
I haven't noticed it that much in the Chinese version, to be honest. Like it wasn't that bad. In the wargaming version, it was way worse. Like, remember the fucking death laser, like Caesar and
Yes.
yeah, you know what I'm
that's
talking
kind of a
about.
separate issue.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was fixed.
And they did fix it. Yeah, once it started popping up, Caesar, your ranged, your reload buff is gone. Now it's a range buff. There we go, fixed.
But like, it's not that bad in the Chinese version. At least so far, I haven't noticed it.
Well, the thing is with the Chinese version, is because of the new game mode, it is much harder for archers to find protection, and for cavalry, which is much stronger in that new game mode, it is also much easier to just pick up archers for free all the time. I just had one game, well, not one game, but I had one of the games that I've watched also recently from the Chinese version. I played cavalry. And I think our team had 0 ranged units. But the case was, it was Salernum. We fought in the center, and the enemy had 2 or 3 ranged units in the center. All obviously covered by infantry, right? They were protected. But all it took was gunslingers, elephants, and my cavalry. Elephants attacking from the front, my cavalry attacking from behind. And even if you suicide into archers, even if you trade your cavalry for archers, which I managed to kill the archers without losing my cavalry. But even if I did, it wouldn't be an issue, right? But that then forces archers, once they die, once they're even if they don't die, but they're forced to retreat and heal, that disconnects them from the protection of infantry 95% of the time. And then cavalry players, all they have to do is go somewhere between the enemy army and the respawns. Hey, 3 archer player to kill. Oh, another one. Oh, another one. Oh, artillery. Gotta pick all that up and just win the game single-handedly.
I think the range...
That's why range meta definitely doesn't exist anymore in this new game mode. But let's talk about it outside of the new game mode and how it would work, in a team environment, especially when you have full coordination and archer players are actually provided the protection they need. They don't get abandoned, and it's a tournament game, let's say, between 2 highly skilled teams. Does range meta exist then?
So I don't know if I would tag it as range meta, right? But there's no, cav and ranged units are the carry units, right? Very rarely does a melee unit swing the battle to make the game. But
Which we
here, let me
covered already.
finish. Let me finish.
Sure.
Pikes. Yeah, okay. But so that I can see where some people can argue that range units are strong, right? But they're not taking the whole picture into account, right? Like, you have a job as an infantry, right? You're not supposed to be this unstoppable death machine that just slices through everything and 1v10s the game.
Not?
What?
Okay.
Yeah, every Germanicus player in existence just like Nani.
Yeah,
Exactly. Me?
I'm not gonna lie, dude. I'm a melee player, and I didn't play much. I refuse to play Germanicus
Yeah, me
because
too, man.
he
Fuck that guy.
is too meta, and
Yes.
I would basically win every 1v1 except against pikes just because I pressed R and the win button. But anyway, that's a different subject, and so it does feel bad to be a melee and not have any control over that range units, right? And since I always played in a group, and all of us pretty much always played in a group, maybe you guys solo queued more than me, that takes a ton of the pain out of it.
Good luck going solo queue as archers.
That takes
Even in the
a
old
ton
game
of
mode.
the pain. Like, a ton of the pain out of it, right? Because you have someone to work with, you have someone to coordinate with. You don't feel so like, I'm getting deleted by these javelins because like I feel like this whole range meta thing might have came from solo queue players. Because as a solo queue, let's say infantry player, you can choose to follow your range.
He's faster. Oh, I taken 5% of my HP. No.
You can,
Okay.
well, I mean, depends on your class, right? If you're a barbarian, you're going to take more. But anyway, but you're faster, so you can run them
I
down.
Story of my
mean-
life, dude.
I mean, that's not
But you're
necessarily
faster,
true.
so you can run them down. But anyway, like back to the point, right? As a solo queue player, it does feel worse to go against ranged units, and I think that's where the whole stereotype of the ranged meta came from. I mean, in the old version, when it was kill points and it was kind of campy, sure, it was stronger back then, and the game mode did a ton to fix that, and that's why like I don't think it exists anymore, and I don't think it really existed that much back then.
Yeah, I also
But-
think it didn't exist. Like range meta didn't exist even on the old game mode.
Oh, it
But-
did for a while.
But
I
at the
only
same,
like.
go ahead.
Go ahead. No,
Oh.
go ahead.
No, you.
But at the same time, you know, as a solo queue player who's sitting there as infantry, like I did occasionally solo queue, and if I saw javelins, I was like, I guess I just walk to the other side of the map because I'm about to get fucking obliterated by these javelins, and I don't have someone to work with because I know
Germanicus like,
Tweedledee.
haha, this too though.
Yeah, well, I didn't play Germanicus, right? If you're
Yeah, I know,
if you
yeah,
didn't
that's what I'm
play the
saying.
one general that could, you know, make that stuff go away and make your life perfect, right?
No, but then he gets
yeah,
hit by
yeah.
heavy artillery.
But you know, I think like since we always had a gaming group to play with, it does tone it down a ton. It's not you know a range man. It's not overpowered, but to a solo queue player who's hopping in, especially in the low tiers and he doesn't know much, and you know, or he's playing any general other than you know Germanicus and he has really low armor because at the low tier he's going to be like, I'm getting obliterated. I'm going to go rage on the forums now. You know.
Yeah, that's also one of the things that emphasizes it, or rather feeds into the range meta myth or meme, is that ranged units are much stronger on low tiers, which is where majority of players reside and get their initial experience from, obviously, right? Well, not majority, all of them. So they get that preconception that ranged units are wrecking me when I'm tier 4, therefore all ranged units are bad, and it also feeds because that's just psychology. For example, in Conqueror's Blade that I am playing for a year now, people are always raging about range meta when it was never range meta. But because they're raging about it and crying about it on forums, boomer games, just like Creative Assembly, are just giving up under that pressure from the community about them just crying and crying and crying about the ranged meta. So they nerfed the bow hero in Conqueror's Blade to the point it's useless, and pretty much the same happened in Arena. With patch 3.1, patch 3.1 was mainly aimed to address the frustration within the community, with both ranged units and friendly fire. That's when they changed heavy artillery, their famous rework, as they said on the stream. This rework will change the way you look at artillery. And what they did? They made it shoot one rock. That was the only change they did. And well, rock deals more damage, but there's only one of it. Great rework, yeah, sure. I didn't even touch upon that when we were talking about heavy artillery, but it was a mistake, a huge mistake, but I'm not going to go into it. So yeah, that 3.1 patch was mainly addressed on reducing the frustration within the community. So they increased accuracy of ranged units. So when noobs were shooting enemy units from behind your own units, right? So you're a ranged unit, in front of you is your friendly Germanicus that fights the enemy Germanicus, and you just start shooting the enemy Germanicus, right? And because your accuracy was so low, you would very often hit that Germanicus, your own Germanicus in the back, and you did a lot of damage, because back then the damage of ranged units was pretty high. Which is compensated by shit aim. But now in 3.1 they increased accuracy, so when you're shooting the enemy unit from behind, from behind your own unit, it doesn't hit your unit that often. But what they did all the rework around the accuracy, and because accuracy was buffed, they needed to compensate in other areas. So they compensated in missile block. They increased missile block so heavily on all units that barely anything gets through from the front, which is arguably a good thing, because that rewards ranged players for actually hitting the enemies from the sides and the back. So arguably a good thing. Also increases.
I mean, it depends on who they're playing, right? Like,
Mm.
if you're someone who doesn't have any form of raised shields at all, Carthage. Sorry, someone's in my throat. You're Carthage, right? Well, I can't sit there and testudo. I can't sit there and raise shields. I can't reduce the damage in any way from the front.
Yeah, but now pretty much all the units, even the light units, they get very, very high missile block from the front.
I'm saying that
it's
like,
all about closing distance, right? So
I think the change is good.
You use a melee unit, you enter the range of a ranged unit, you start being shot, but you're blocking 80% of the shots, and the shots that make it through deal very little damage because they nerfed the damage as well, and that kind of broke because the formula for damage is somehow so fucked up that, for example, when I was playing tier 6 slingers, I remember they had a sling that gave you 5 more damage, just 5 more damage, regular damage, not AP damage, and it compensated for 5 range. So it traded 5 less range for 5 more normal damage. And suddenly, when you had that better sling, the one with more damage, your damage increased by 4 times. Like I was shooting, no matter what I was shooting, only AP damage goes through. I suddenly increased my normal damage by 5, and suddenly I deal like 40, 60 damage per shot. What the hell happened? I just added 5 damage. Why is my damage now 5, 6 times bigger? What the hell?
It is also multiplied by the amount of models you have and the amount of times they shoot.
No, it isn't.
No, it does. Every shot.
They played with the numbers so much. Like when I actually think about that 3.1 patch, I love to meme about the 3.1. When you actually think about the changes they did to ranged, a lot of them are good changes that also reward better players while also reducing the impact that bad players have. So for example, when it was the standard thing that you shoot an enemy unit that is fighting your unit and you're shooting your own unit in the back, if you were to do that before the patch, you would just deal more friendly fire than you're actually dealing damage to the enemy. But after the patch, it was the other way around. So you could be that noob that just shoots enemy units from the front while hitting your own units in the back. But now you're not being punished for it because you still contributed ever so slightly positively to the game, to your team, rather than negatively by dealing more damage to your own unit than to the enemy. So in that case, it is kind of bad because it doesn't punishing a noob for doing a noob thing. But if it serves to reduce the toxicity within the community and frustration that the melee player faces, because it's not his fault, like he engaged infantry, he did his job, and he's getting punished because he has a noob on his team that friendly fires him, right? That's annoying, people get pissed off about it, and rightfully so. So CA did something to counterbalance that. They essentially dumped the game down somehow to reduce the impact that noobs have on it. But at the same time, they made a genius move and they made, also more rewards for better players that can now somewhat abuse the laser accuracy that there is. But at the same time, they've completely fucked up the damage that the ranged units deal, and the missile block sometimes is just too much from the front. And you've got ridiculous situations where you shoot barbarian units in the back. They're supposed to be lightly armored. You're supposed to be rewarded for hitting them in the back. And yes, you get rewarded because they don't block your missiles anymore, so you deal more damage. But you still deal only AP damage to fucking barbarians while you're hitting them in the back. Hello? The least armored unit in the battlefield, you're hitting them in the back and you're still doing AP damage. Something's wrong.
No.
Yeah, obviously, says the first player. So, yeah, they need to just revise the numbers in there. Like, a lot of these changes are really good on principle. So, kind of the opposite of the heavy artillery work they did, where a lot of the changes they made were absolutely shit in terms of principles. So ranged unit rework in patch 3.1, overall good. They just need to tweak the numbers. They just need to find the right numbers. What I would do is increase damage at the cost of accuracy. Don't make the accuracy as bad as it was, because you'll go back to what it was, and it also wasn't good because of the frustration it was causing. But slightly decrease accuracy and increase damage to compensate for the smaller accuracy. But then that should fix, the problems with inconsistent damage, where you shoot enemy in the back and they don't take any additional damage.
I mean, I think if you shoot them in the back, you decimate them. But if you shoot them in the front and they have a shield in their hand, it should reduce it.
The problem is that I think they block a little bit too much. So the thing with the range meta, right? And when I talked and I asked you about the tournament setting, right? 2 organized, coordinated, and skilled teams fighting each other. What happens in that scenario, if you go for the range meta build, which is, essentially you play the protect the range player and let him carry, all the enemy team has to do is close the distance, start fighting your melee units, and if they didn't take range, they have 3 more units. Let's say the range team has only 1 range player, 3 units, and tries to protect it, while the enemy team has 0 range units, and therefore have 3 more melee units. And those 3 melee units, even regardless of whether or not they can make through and punch through the enemy formation or surround it somehow, put enough pressure so that the range units have to retreat or get caught off guard and get just decimated charged, which very often happens. But even if they don't manage that, they close distance so fast that the ranged units don't have enough time to deal enough damage before they got reduced to being useless. Because still, shooting an enemy unit when it is facing your direction and you're shooting and it is being blocked by your own unit, it's not doing that much damage at all, which is, I guess, a good thing. But just because the damage is so low, the archer player has very little situations in which he can deal significant damage that would be able to lift his own weight, because you just sacrificed having 3 melee units for having 3 ranged units. So in order for the 3 ranged units to be worth it, they would need to deal an equivalent of 3 HP, 3 full units of infantry, right, to make it worth. And very often that is just not possible. And then you add a unit like elephants that can just punch through all the protection that the archer player has and force the archers out, because they obviously can force the elephant. And very often they won't have anywhere to run because everything is engaged, so it cannot disengage anymore, they cannot kite. And the range meta is just dismantled so easily, just by having elephants, for example, or just having 3 more melee units. So yeah, for me, range meta never existed. And you have some exceptions, like Cretan archers. They had really big damage, but that just comes down to the numbers not being right. You have some ranged units that deal a crap ton of damage, and you have some ranged units that deal close to no damage. So they should just look into the numbers, the damage numbers, and balance them out to make it more consistent across all tiers, and it should be fine. Just make archers viable by making them deal a little bit more damage on certain tiers, a little less damage on other tiers, so that they can lift their own weight in situations such as these that I've described. And then it just comes down to stylistic choice, whether or not you prefer the rush tactic or you prefer the protect the range player tactic. Both are viable, both are equally valuable, and then it comes down to skill. Yep. And right now it comes down to unit selection, sadly. Okay, anybody wants to chime in on my monologue?
One last thing before we move to the next point is what I would suggest, in case somebody from CA is listening, please take the stuff on the forums with a grain of salt, and by that I mean lethal doses of salt. The people there are not on the same skill level as the people who compete, and those who are casual players, you cannot balance the game around those players. And like any successful esports game so far has always balanced it around the top, the cream of the crop players. When Magic the Gathering, and I know I keep using it because it's been around for 25 years, which is an eternity in game years, they must have been doing something right. They only balance around tournaments, the people who make a living out of playing this game. And what they do, they look at the meta statistically. They don't look at the forums. If you look at the forums, you see the dumbest things in existence.
I mean, you need to be careful about looking at the game only through statistics.
Oh, not just through statistics. No, through players, through experienced players. You know, with the whole Praetorian system, that's one of the reasons why
I was a Praetorian since the very beginning, pretty much.
Yeah. They need to listen to those Praetorians, look at the statistics, and just those forums. That can at least give you an idea as what people think. But if you start balancing the game around the forums, you're going to have what Pokemon could have become, aka a very, very bad game. You know how everybody is like, oh, I want to have only Gen 1, but with the entire world open, I want to have the dumbest Pokemons and things like that.
Yeah, about listening to Praetorians, just saying, but the heavy artillery rework, as it is right now in the game, was suggested by a Praetorian.
Yes.
I was heavily against that suggestion, but they decided to listen to the older Praetorian, and well, now
Praetorian that has... Yeah, that's why you cannot, even among Praetorians, you cannot have them be all equal. Like, who is that Praetorian? Nobody knows. Some random guy who picked up a Total War once in 10 years.
No, he was actually one of the most influential Praetorians back then.
Well, apparently he's not. He shouldn't have been.
Apparently no. But yeah, it's just about careful listening to feedback. It's to say.
And also,
take everything with a great pinch of salt, whether it comes from, you know, a Praetorian or it is written on the forum. Just judge everything based on its own merits. Don't even look at who posted it. Just take everything into consideration as it is written and not by whom it is written. By who? By whom? I don't know. English is hard, right?
Yes, that's true, but you need to get your feedback from somewhere and you need to prioritize that feedback.
Yeah,
so
you're taking feedback, but just, you know, you have to be smart about listening to that feedback.
Yes.
But that's also the problem, right? Because the devs very often don't play the games themselves, and they look at statistics, they look at feedback, they lack their own experience in their own game to verify that feedback.
So that's why we are here. That's why large companies employ play testing. They have a QA experts who all they do is to play the game, not to find bugs, but to test the game at the highest possible level. The head of design in Wizards of the Coast, Magic Division, is Melissa DeTora, an ex-professional Magic player. That's exactly how you do it. You promote people based on their merit. You know these people are legit because they play the game, they have, you know, paid their dues, so to speak, and those are the people you should listen to. You should not be listening to people with who have clear personal biases, people who have clear agendas, or those who just like to post instead of play.
Yeah, but then people will say, "Oh, Mistru plays ranged units. Obviously, he'll advertise buffing ranged units, and he'll say that range meta doesn't exist. But deep down, he knows that range meta exists. And
I mean, even as a
he wants to make it even stronger." Hello, I am a heavy artillery player back on Steam. They buffed the ever-loving shit out of artillery, and I stopped playing artillery based on that. Just saying.
As a melee player, I don't think there is a ranged meta, right? I think there is, you know, like, I think you got to look at it from multiple angles, right? Like, if you get like 3 Praetorians or whoever you want, right, that play 3 different classes and you kind of like get everyone's input, I would say that's probably the ideal way to do it.
Yeah, and if all of them tell you that range meta doesn't exist, it probably doesn't exist. But then, but there's 3 Praetorians here, and there's 50 people on forums crying about ranged meta. Ranged meta must be true in the end.
You know, just statistically, that's what they think. But their statistic, it's the same problem with democracy. A professor's vote should not be equal to a shepherd's vote, you know?
Okay, maybe let's not dive into that. But anyway,
but like, you know,
that is a little bit of a problem because, I mean, it depends on how to look at it, because they want the game to have a huge audience, right? So maybe you do changes. Yeah. You do changes like patch 3.1, which maybe from a competitive perspective is bad, but it is good from the perspective of the overall population. Because as I said, it was aimed mostly at reducing frustration of the players. If players are frustrated when playing your game, and you, for example, get frustrated when playing against heavy artillery, well, then people will start leaving the game. And even if the competitive players say, oh, this game is so well balanced, but if it doesn't have the casual players to live off of, then the game dies anyway. So there's a very delicate balance. And as you mentioned, right, Mongoose made the same argument back on our first podcast, that all the successful esports games do balance it around the highest level of play. But I don't know the escape that well. But for example, League of Legends, right? They definitely balance it around the highest level of play, and rightfully so. But also what they have is that most of the players play ranked, right? And if it's normal, if you feed in normal, if you take some dumb shit or whatever, nobody cares because it's a normal. People care about ranked, but in ranked, you always play with people around your skill level, almost always, right? Elo Hell exists.
Well, you still have an MMR.
Well, in Arena, the main queue or the only queue is unranked. So the skill level of players is all over the place. Sometimes one team is clearly better than the other, or there's just a huge disparity between team members. We can have a very strong right flank where all the good players went and very weak left flank, while the enemy team did the same, and the good flanks just kill the weaker flanks and then they end up fighting each other. So should you balance Arena for the highest game level, even if there is no ranked queue? And even if there is, it would exist alongside the non-ranked queue, and the non-ranked queue would still be the main. I still think yes, you should balance around the highest level of play, because if you don't do that, then you have, broken units that good players can abuse. For example, I think that the heavy artillery work, as we've seen between Steam and Wargaming, it was aimed at the noob players, right? Because a good player would know how to play around. As I said, there was the low risk, low reward playstyle, and there was high risk, high reward. And then the noobs would play the low risk, low reward because they couldn't play high reward. Because if they face a high risk and they don't know how to deal with it, they would just die all the time. So they went for low risk, low reward. But then, heavy artillery sucks. There's nothing for me to do. I'm just camping here behind a cliff. Nothing in my range. Boring. I can move forward. So CA is like, okay, we've got you. A very good newbie. We're gonna give you IKEA set and you'll be able to pack your artillery and deploy it anywhere you want. Right? And then a noob player who will not understand what kind of opportunities it gives to him, he'll just use it as developers kind of intended, right? He's camping behind a cliff. Okay, go pick up your artillery, deploy somewhere where you will be able to shoot and have fun. It works for noob players, but then you have a good artillery player who understands what kind of advantage that tool gives him, and you have a situation like in the tournament where a heavy artillery kited an elephant. So you have the good players take that, noob friendly aimed change and take it to a ridiculous level, and they can not only use it in tournaments, they can use it in regular solo battles. Not solo battles, but regular queue, and just wreck everybody in there by abusing the mobility of heavy artillery or any other, change that was aimed at noob players that make good players ridiculously strong.
You mentioned a ranked mode, and personally, I like as much as it is cool. I think they need a bigger player base to do it, because then it splits it between norms and ranked. B, I really don't want to play a game where I'm facing the same teams over and over again because that's the best stuff. Every game that introduces some form of ranked becomes this monotonous meta slave. And if I want to maintain my status as a competitive player, then I can only play, for example, as a melee. Probably it would end up being Germanicus or Hashtable. And I think that's another way you can buff ranged units, right? Like lowering your missile block across the board, probably don't do that. But, lower things like, why does Testudo have to block 100%? Why does range shields with the additional missile block you have innately become 100%? Why does those things, like for example, someone like Hannibal, who has to use his forced march, he takes 20% more range damage, and he doesn't have a range shield or raise shield, right? But then you have Germanicus, who's going to outslap him regardless because he has vengeance, and then he also gets the best range defense in the game too. On top of that, right?
And also the best charge.
And the best charge, right? And so it's one of those things where like you can buff ranged by tweaking other classes, right? Like if cavalry's not so strong, like you could reduce cavalry strength, you could make archers better, you can tweak different melee units so that they're not so oppressive. They're not just going to sit there and be like, rain down on me and it does nothing but tickle me.
I mean, I would actually argue the opposite. So you said that don't lower the missile block across the board. I would actually do that, because then that gives a higher significance to abilities like Testudo, like raise shields, right? And then you have a clear distinction between units that have that ability and those that don't have, right? And then as an archer player, okay, this is Germanicus. If I start shooting him, he'll just go into Testudo. Oh, but this is a Sula player, so I can shoot him and still deal good damage. But with everyone having a very high missile block chance,
I'm just gonna play
it doesn't matter.
Germanicus.
It's either hitting 0% or just 20%, which isn't much anyway.
Yeah,
and maybe you'll just play Germanicus, but then you can argue, well, you just play Germanicus because it's not only it has the Testudo, that counter ranged meta that doesn't exist.
Or I'll play Hashtable and just heal myself all the damage you just did, which is ridiculous. They need to take that out. Like, my God.
Yeah, but then that goes into, Germanicus is much better than every other melee commander, right? Which is kind of beyond the point of balancing archers. Well, it still affects them, but very, very indirectly and not that much. Well, anyway.